Hi, my name's Brittany, and I work for the City of Austin's Watershed Protection Department. Today, we're going to be making a diagram of the water cycle. Now, I know all of you out there are super smart and probably already know a lot of things about the water cycle. However, our diagram today is going to show us how a watershed and an aquifer work together in a water cycle. For this activity, you'll need a piece of paper, you'll need a regular pencil, and you'll also need a blue pencil. Let's get started. We're going to start our diagram by using our regular pencil. And to get started, we're going to write a title. So go ahead and write with me, Diagram of a Watershed and Aquifer. And since we're talking about what's at the surface, our watershed, our land, and what's down below us, our aquifer, our Edwards Aquifer, we're going to go ahead and draw a straight line, hamburger style, right through the center of our page. On top of that line, we're going to draw our watershed, or the land, and we're going to do that using this elongated W. And now, anytime that we're making a diagram, we want to make sure that we have some type of legend or some type of key, so that way when we go back and look at this diagram, we know what all of these symbols mean. So, up here in the corner, we're going to write W equals watershed. Now down below this line, because we have our aquifer, we're going to go ahead and we're going to draw some A's down below to represent that aquifer. And then in our key, we're going to write A equals aquifer. Now we're going to switch over to our blue pencil. So when we're using our blue pencil, we're representing water. Now, I'm sure that all of you watching this know a lot of things about our water cycle. When the sun's rays hit a body of water, that thermal energy will allow for some of that water to evaporate. That water will turn into water vapor and it'll rise up into the atmosphere. As the water vapor cools down in the atmosphere, it will condense and we'll get the formation of clouds. So go ahead, using your blue pencil, draw some clouds up above your watershed. And then as those clouds get really, really heavy, we're going to get precipitation. We're going to get things like rain, sleet, maybe even some snow if we're lucky. For our diagram, just go ahead and draw a light rainstorm coming down from our clouds. Now, we know because of the force of gravity that any time it rains on top of our hills, on those ridges, the really tall parts of our watershed, that water is going to move downhill. And we call that runoff. So go ahead and write runoff on top of that line. And now because we do have lakes, we have rivers, we know that some of that water is actually going to collect at the surface. And whenever we have water at the surface, we call that surface water. And we're going to represent that using an S. And since we're using a symbol, we're going to make sure that we write that in our key. So S equals surface water. Now, because we have a recharge zone, an area of land that has things like caves and sinkholes, really large cracks and fractures, that allows for water to easily enter our Edwards Aquifer, we know that some of the surface water is going to go underground. And any time that we talk about surface water moving down into our aquifer, we call that recharge. So go ahead and write recharge next to that line. Now, we're going to have some water that is in our Edwards Aquifer. Now, when we have water at the surface, we call this surface water. But when we have water down below, underground, we actually call that groundwater. So go ahead, draw some G's next to those A's to represent the groundwater that has recharged the aquifer. In your key, make sure that you get G equals groundwater. And now water here in Central Texas is actually really neat. And that's because even though it will recharge our aquifer and go underground, sometimes it will actually come back up to the surface. And often it does that through things called springs. Some of you may know of a very famous spring that we have here in the city of Austin, our Barton Springs. Some of you may have even been swimming at Barton Springs. Actually, water from the Edwards Aquifer comes back up at Barton Springs. So anytime you go to Barton Springs, you're actually swimming in aquifer water. Now, when we talk about water, groundwater, coming back up to the surface, we actually call that discharge. So go ahead and write discharge next to that spring that we have drawn on our diagram. Now that we've finished this diagram, hopefully you have a better understanding of how a watershed and an aquifer work together in the water cycle. If you're still working on your diagram, feel free to pause the video here and finish drawing your diagram. After this lesson, don't forget to check out more lessons and fun activities at austintexas.gov/watershed/youth ed.